The deep hum of the starship Aurora's wing faded as it locked onto the orbital docking rings of the Virilan Palace station. Through the observation glass, Captain Daniel Cross looked out at the enormous structure. It was unlike anything he had seen before. The palace hung in space like a jewel, a sphere of crystal and silver towers, each one glowing faintly against the darkness. The surface shimmered as if the whole station were made of liquid glass, frozen in place. Rings of smaller structures circled it, dotted with ships from a dozen alien worlds. Daniel's ship was small by comparison, barely the size of one of the palace's outer docking pylons. As the docking clamps locked, the ship shuddered gently. "You ready for this, Captain?" his first mate, Alvarez, asked from behind him. Daniel smiled faintly. "As ready as I'll ever be." The request for his presence had come unexpectedly. A formal invitation from the Virilan High Court. He wasn't a diplomat or a trader with influence or a soldier of rank. He was just a man who moved cargo between colonies. The message had been short, almost cold. Captain Daniel Cross, requested at Virilan Royal Audience. Immediate arrival expected. No explanation. No reason given. Now, as the airlock opened, he found himself stepping into a place most humans had never seen. The docking corridor was wide and arched, lined with silver panels that reflected faint blue light from glowing veins in the walls. Two tall guards in ornate armor stood at the far end, their skin a pale shade of violet, eyes like molten gold. They wore flowing cloaks that shifted color slightly as they moved. "Captain Cross," one said, his voice deep and smooth. "You will follow?" Daniel nodded. His boots echoed on the polished floor as he walked between them. Behind the guards, the corridor opened into the palace proper, and Daniel had to stop for a moment to take it all in. The grand hall stretched out like a dream. It was a single chamber large enough to hold his entire ship inside. The ceiling, arched high above, painted with swirling galaxies and dotted with crystal chandeliers that seemed to hang in midair without chains. Marble-like floors reflected the starlight pouring in through transparent walls. Columns of carved silver rose like trees, their branches merging into the ceiling. Dozens of alien nobles moved across the hall, their robes trailing behind them. Daniel caught glimpses of scales, feathers, and shimmering skin among them. Their voices were low, formal, and in a language he couldn't understand, though every word seemed sharp, like blades wrapped in silk. As he walked forward, he felt their eyes on him. Whispers followed. Human. The word carried through the air like a ripple in water. Humans were rare in Virilan space. Most never traveled beyond the human colonies, and those who did often stuck to trade hubs and mining stations. The Virilan court was different. It was the center of one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the sector, and they had summoned him. From behind one of the great silver columns, a figure watched. Princess Aria Virilan had been listening to her mother's advisors drone on about trade disputes when she saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his human uniform plain compared to the jeweled armor and robes of the court, but carrying himself with quiet confidence. She knew him instantly. Months ago, in a frozen canyon on a mining moon, she had lain bleeding and half-conscious as mercenaries hunted her. Her guards had been killed or scattered. And then, he had appeared. No royal escort, no grand weapons, just a blaster, a battered coat, and the kind of stubborn bravery that did not break, even in the face of certain death. The court had never heard the truth. They believed her rescue had been the work of loyal guards who had found her after days in hiding. That was the official story. But she remembered. Now, here he was, walking through the grand hall as though the universe had folded in on itself to bring him here. Aria's heart gave a small, unsteady beat. She stayed in the shadow of the column, her golden eyes following his every step. Daniel didn't see her. His attention was fixed on the towering silver doors at the far end of the hall, the entrance to the throne chamber. The guards led him toward it, their movements precise, as though each step was part of a dance. At the center of the hall, an alien noble blocked his path. Tall and thin, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes as white as snow, the noble tilted, his head. "A human," he said in accented basic. "And in the royal court, how curious." Daniel gave a polite nod. "Just answering an invitation." The noble's lip curled. "We do not invite without purpose." His gaze swept over Daniel's simple uniform, lingering with a hint of disdain. "Perhaps you are here for entertainment?" One of the guards stepped forward. "The guest is under royal summons. Move aside." The noble gave a slow, mocking bow and drifted away, his robe whispering over the marble floor. Daniel kept walking, but he felt the weight of more stares on him now. He wasn't just an outsider. He was a disruption. The silver doors loomed ahead. Intricate carvings of stars and beasts covered their surface. They opened with a deep rolling sound, revealing the throne chamber beyond. The room was smaller than the hall, but no less grand. A long carpet of deep blue stretched from the entrance to the dais at the far end, where the queen of the Virilan Empire sat. Her throne was a work of art, carved from a single crystal, glowing softly from within. The queen herself was regal and imposing, her crown of silver arcs glimmering against her violet hair. Daniel stepped forward, aware that every movement was being watched. From the side of the dais, still half in shadow, Arya's eyes never left him. She could feel the moment building, the moment when her mother's gaze would fall on the man who had once carried her through a blizzard, who had stood between her and death without asking for reward or recognition, and, in her mind, the words were already there, waiting for when her mother asked the question she knew would come. The heavy silver doors closed behind Daniel with a deep echo, sealing him inside the throne chamber. The air here felt different, cooler, sharper, as if the very atmosphere was charged with silent judgment. At the far end, Queen Melora Virelin sat upon her crystal throne, her posture perfect, her eyes calm but unreadable. Around her, nobles and advisors stood in precise positions, their jeweled robes and flowing sashes marking rank and influence. Every single one of them turned their attention to the human who had just entered. Daniel kept his steps steady as he walked down the long blue carpet. His boots made almost no sound, but to him each footfall seemed louder than the last. He stopped at the appointed distance from the throne and bowed slightly, keeping his gaze respectful. "Your Majesty," he said. The Queen's voice, when it came, was cool and measured. "Captain Daniel Cross, you stand in the court of the Virilan Empire by my command. Few of your kind have walked these halls. Fewer still have stood before me. Do you know why you are here?" Daniel shook his head slightly. "No, Your Majesty. Your message did not say." The Queen tilted her head, studying him. "Then perhaps you will enlighten me on a more pressing matter." Her gaze slid to her right, toward a figure standing just out of the full light. Daniel followed her eyes. Princess Arya stepped forward. The moment she entered the brighter space, the air in the room shifted. Whispers passed among the nobles like wind in tall grass. Arya's gown shimmered with soft silver threads, the fabric flowing like water as she moved. Her golden eyes, bright against her pale violet skin, were fixed on Daniel, not with the polite curiosity the other nobles showed, but with something deeper. The Queen's voice broke the quiet. "Arya," she said, her tone carrying a subtle undercurrent of command. "Who is this man?" The question seemed simple, but it carried weight. In the Viralan court, words were weapons, and the wrong answer could start political storms. Arya's gaze did not waver. Her voice was steady, even as her heart pounded. "The human I married," she said. The chamber froze. Every whisper stopped. Every eye widened. The queen's own hand, halfway to lifting her ceremonial cup, paused in the air. The words seemed to hang there, solid and unshakable, filling every corner of the throne room. Daniel blinked. Married, he hadn't expected that. He knew about the survival vow they'd made on that frozen moon, but in human terms, it had been nothing more than a promise to keep each other alive until help came. He hadn't realized it was binding law in Viralan culture. The silence broke at last, not with polite applause, but with a rising tide of angry, confused voices. "This is impossible," shouted a noble draped in green silks. "A human cannot enter the royal line," cried another, her jeweled headpiece rattling, as she gestured sharply. "This threatens our alliances. This dishonors the throne." The queen raised her hand, and the noise died instantly. Her golden eyes were locked on her daughter. "Explain," she said. Arya stepped forward, her voice clear enough for every ear in the room. "Months ago, during my inspection of the mining colonies on Trask 7, our convoy was ambushed. My guards were slain or scattered. I was hunted across the ice by mercenaries. Captain Cross found me, injured and freezing. Without him, I would have died before the sun set. To survive, we performed the binding oath, as is tradition when two lives depend on each other's survival." Several nobles exchanged looks. One muttered, "Ancient tradition," as if tasting something unpleasant. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know it meant marriage," he admitted, speaking up for the first time since Arya's declaration. "Where I'm from, it was just a promise. I only wanted to make sure she lived." The queen's gaze moved between them, measuring every word, every small movement. "In our law," she said slowly, "the binding oath is no mere ritual. It joins two lives, not just in survival, but in union. To break it would require an act of the Senate and the blessing of the Starsong priests. Neither is easily given." Daniel's brow furrowed. "So, you're saying this is official?" A sharp laugh came from one side of the chamber. A tall noble with silver tattoos along his jaw stepped forward. "Official? It is an outrage. Your Majesty, if you allow this union to stand, the houses will rebel. The humans have no place among us. They are inferior." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Years of dealing with arrogant traitors and hostile border officers had taught him that answering insults with words was rarely worth it. Arya, however, stepped between him and the noble. "Inferior," she said, her tone ice-sharp. "This man carried me across 3 days of blizzard with no shelter, no supplies, and no hope of rescue. He faced armed mercenaries with a single blaster and did not turn away. Tell me, Lord Talvin." "How many of your guards would have done the same knowing they had nothing to gain?" Talvin's mouth opened, then closed again. The queen's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest of her throne. She did not speak for a long moment. When she finally did, her voice was cool but layered with something harder beneath. "The laws of the Virellan Empire are not swayed by outrage alone," she said, "but neither are they blind to the needs of stability. A union between my daughter and a human will be tested, not only in the eyes of the houses, but in the eyes of the people. Therefore, I declare this. Captain Daniel Cross will undergo the trial of 3. Whispers erupted again. The phrase trial of 3 carried weight here. Daniel could hear it in the nobles' voices, in the sudden, sharp attention in their eyes. The trial of 3 will test loyalty, courage, and wisdom, the queen continued. If he succeeds, he will remain bound to my daughter in the eyes of the Empire. If he fails... Her gaze turned to him like a blade. The binding oath will be dissolved, and he will be exiled from Viralan space. Daniel met her eyes. "And if I refuse the trial?" "Then the marriage ends, and you will leave," she said simply. "You will never return." There was no hesitation in Daniel's voice. "I'll take the trial." A murmur rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. The nobles leaned toward each other, some with excitement, others with disbelief. Queen Mylora gave a small nod, as if she had expected his answer. "So be it. The first trial begins at dawn tomorrow." Two guards stepped forward, gesturing for Daniel to follow. As he turned to leave, Arya's voice called softly behind him. "Daniel." He looked back. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since the frozen moon, he saw the same quiet determination that had carried them both through the storm. "Trust yourself," she said. "You've already passed harder trials than they can imagine." The doors closed between them, but her words stayed with him as the guards led him away. In the shadows of the court, some nobles whispered of scandal, others of opportunity. And in the heart of the Virilean palace, the queen watched her daughter closely, not with anger, but with a silent question in her mind. Could a human truly prove himself worthy of the empire? Night fell over the Virilean palace, but Daniel Cross could not sleep. The guest quarters they had given him were larger than his entire ship's living space. Tall, arched windows looked out over the glittering curve of the planet below. The floor was soft under his bare feet, the air warm and scented faintly with something floral. It should have been comfortable, but his mind would not rest. The trial of 3 began at dawn. He didn't know what the challenges would be. He didn't know how much of it would be fair, or if the whole thing was meant to make him fail. He leaned against the window, staring at the stars. His reflection stared back at him, a human, out of place in a palace of silver and crystal. He remembered Arya's words earlier that day. "You've already passed harder trials than they can imagine." Those words brought him back to the day they met. Months earlier, the mining moon Trask 7, the storm had started at midday. By nightfall, it was a wall of white fury. Daniel's freighter, Aurora's Wing, had been running cargo between the outer colonies when a distress signal came in. It was faint and broken, but the coordinates were clear. A remote mining moon, with almost no atmosphere and temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in seconds. Most captains would have ignored it. Distress calls in the outer rim often meant traps. But Daniel had a habit of answering. It wasn't about being a hero, it was about not being able to live with himself if he didn't try. He landed on the rocky surface just as the storm began, to swallow the horizon. The wind screamed across the frozen plains, carrying ice shards sharp enough to cut through thin metal. The signal led him to a crashed transport half buried in snow. The hull was scorched, and black smoke curled into the air before being torn away by the wind. Daniel fought his way inside. The air was thin, and the cold bit into his bones even through his insulated coat. He found her in the wreckage. Princess Arya was lying against a broken bulkhead, her uniform torn and blood seeping from a wound in her side. Her skin was pale violet. Her lips nearly blue from the cold. Her eyes flickered open when she heard him. "Who?" "Name's Daniel Cross," he said quickly, kneeling beside her. "I'm here to get you out." She shook her head weakly. "You shouldn't be here. They're hunting me." "Yeah, well," Daniel said, glancing at the shattered doorway. "Then we'd better move before they find us." She tried to push herself up, but winced in pain. "My guards." "I didn't see anyone else alive," he said gently, avoiding the sharp truth in his tone. "Come on." They left the wreck just as shadows began to move on the ridge. Tall figures, in dark armor, rifles slung across their backs. Mercenaries. Daniel kept low, half carrying Arya through the storm. The wind howled so loud he could barely hear her breathing, but he could feel her trembling against him. After an hour, they found shelter in the mouth of an ice canyon. Daniel patched her wound as best he could with the med kit from his pack. "This will sting," he warned. Her golden eyes met his for the first time. "Do it." He worked quickly, sealing the wound and wrapping it tight. "That should hold until we find real help." She leaned back against the icy wall. "Why? Why what? Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You risked your life just landing here." Daniel hesitated. "Because you needed help. That's enough." The storm raged for 3 days. They moved slowly, hiding in crevices and behind ice pillars when the mercenaries came too close. They had almost no food. Daniel gave her most of his rations, telling her he wasn't hungry even when his stomach ached. On the second night, they sat close together to keep from freezing. She told him her name, though she didn't tell him she was a princess. Not yet. She spoke of the stars she had visited, the strange oceans of the Iridian worlds, the forests of Kuroth where the trees glowed like lanterns. He told her about growing up on a mining colony himself, about fixing ships in freezing hangars, about how space travel was the only way he ever felt free. It was on the third morning, when they were almost out of strength, that she spoke the words of the binding oath. "In my people's tradition," she said, her breath visible in the cold air, "when two lives are bound to survive together, we speak this vow. It means we will protect each other until both are safe, even if it costs our lives." She looked at him seriously. "Will you say it with me?" Daniel thought about the mercenaries hunting them, the storm tearing at the canyon walls, the emptiness of the horizon. He thought about the truth, that without each other, neither of them would last another day. "Yeah," he said, "let's do it." They spoke the words together, her voice steady despite the cold. He didn't understand every phrase, but the meaning was clear. At the end, she pressed her hand to his chest, and he did the same. To Daniel, it was a promise. Nothing more. To her, it was something far greater. They reached a mining outpost later that day. The mercenaries tried to block their way, but Daniel stood in front of her, blaster drawn, and didn't move until the outpost guards arrived to drive the attackers off. Only then did she reveal who she was. He'd been stunned. A princess. Royalty. And he'd just spent 3 days in a blizzard with her, treating her like any other person. When the palace guards finally came to take her home, she'd looked at him with something unreadable in her eyes. "Thank you, Daniel Cross," she had said, "for everything." He thought that was the end of it. Present. The palace. Daniel blinked and shook himself from the memory. He realized he was still staring at the stars beyond the glass. That frozen moon felt like a lifetime ago. Yet tomorrow's trials were a direct consequence of those 3 days. A soft chime sounded at the door. When it slid open, Arya stood there. She wore no formal gown this time, only a simple silver robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. "Can I come in?" she asked. Daniel nodded, and she stepped inside. The room seemed smaller with her in it. "I was thinking about Trask 7, he said. Her lips curved slightly. So was I. For a moment they stood in silence, both remembering the same frozen nights, the same desperate fight to keep moving. "You didn't know what the binding oath meant," she said softly. "I should have told you. Wouldn't have changed what I did," he said. "But it might have been less of a surprise when your mother called me your husband." She smiled faintly, but her eyes were serious. "The trials won't be easy. The court will want you to fail. Some will even try to make sure of it." "I figured as much." She stepped closer. "But I know you. You've already proven yourself to me. All you have to do now is show them what I already know." Daniel met her gaze. "And what's that?" "That? Humans," she said quietly, "are more than they think." For the first time since he'd entered the palace, Daniel felt a spark of confidence, not because he believed the trials would be fair, but because he remembered something from that frozen moon, the truth that had carried them both through the storm. Sometimes survival wasn't about strength or status. Sometimes it was just about refusing to give up, and that he knew was something he could do. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the royal courtyard, casting long shadows on the polished marble floors. The air was crisp, but filled with the weight of anticipation. Today was the first day of the trial of 3. Tests that would decide Captain Daniel Cross's future in the Virilan Empire. The courtyard was already bustling. Nobles in rich robes gathered in clusters, whispering behind fans and gloved hands. Soldiers in shining armor stood at attention along the walls, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. Daniel stood at the edge of the courtyard, his human frame, noticeably different from the lithe and graceful forms of the Virilans. His simple uniform, though neat, lacked the adornments and symbols of rank that the others wore. Despite this, his posture was steady, his eyes calm and alert. Nearby, Princess Arya watched him with quiet pride. Her presence was a silent reminder that this was not just a trial for a stranger, but a challenge that could change the fate of her life and the Empire. The first trial, the Maze of Shadows. A loud chime echoed through the courtyard, signaling the beginning of the first trial. A massive gate slowly opened at the far end, revealing the entrance to the Maze of Shadows, a sprawling labyrinth built beneath the palace, designed to test a person's courage and wit. The maze was infamous. No one had completed it in decades. Its twisting corridors were filled with traps, illusions, and puzzles. It was said to be alive, shifting its walls and pathways to confuse intruders. Daniel took a deep breath and stepped forward. The nobles fell silent, their eyes fixed on him. As he entered, the gates closed behind him with a heavy clang. Darkness swallowed the passage. Alone in the dark, Daniel activated the small light on his wrist device. It cast a pale glow, enough to see the nearby walls, but not enough to reveal the entire maze. The air smelled damp and cold. His boots made soft sounds on the stone floor. Every shadow seemed to move. He remembered the storm on Trask 7. The cold, biting into his skin, the hunger that gnawed at his insides. This maze was different, but the feeling of being alone, tested and hunted, was the same. His first obstacle came quickly, a narrow corridor filled with shifting floor panels. One wrong step could trigger spikes from the walls. Daniel moved, carefully, watching the subtle differences in the stone. He remembered a trick from an old miner's tale. If the floor felt colder underfoot, it might be a safe step. He tested a few tiles before crossing. Halfway through, the maze tried to trick him with illusions, voices calling his name, shadows dancing just beyond reach. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm still here." The watchful eyes back in the courtyard, the nobles watched the large hollow screen projecting the maze's interior. Lord Talvin, the noble who had insulted Daniel in the throne room, leaned forward, his face twisted in a sneer. "He won't last. An hour. This maze has broken stronger men than him." A woman beside him, Lady Mira, nodded. "The trials will be his undoing. The Empire cannot be led by human weakness," but not everyone shared their confidence. Some whispered that the Queen's decision might be the beginning of a new era, one where outsiders could prove themselves by merit, not birthright. The trials test inside. The maze, Daniel faced a series of challenges. He solved puzzles carved into the walls, strange alien symbols that seemed meaningless, until he noticed a pattern in the stars above, which he recalled from the princess's stories. His human experience with star charts gave him an advantage. At one point, a pit opened suddenly in front of him. Reflexes honed by years of space travel saved him from falling, grabbing the ledge just in time. He pressed forward, heart pounding, sweat on his brow. The maze tried to wear him down, but he refused to give in. After hours of struggle, Daniel reached the center chamber, where a pedestal held a glowing crystal. Picking it up triggered the maze's exit. The walls trembled, and the pathway opened. The reaction. The nobles in the courtyard erupted into mixed reactions. Some clapped slowly, others scoffed loudly. Lord Talvin's face darkened with anger. But he did not speak. Instead, the Queen's voice cut through the murmurs. "You have passed the first trial, Captain Cross." Daniel stepped from the maze entrance, tired but victorious. Princess Arya was waiting, her smile warm and proud. "You did it," she said softly. Daniel nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. It was harder than any storm. The second trial. The Council's challenge. The Queen explained the second trial, a test of wisdom and diplomacy. Daniel would need to face the Empire's greatest strategist and debate matters of law and peace. The council chamber was a grand room filled with seated elders and advisors. Their faces were stern, eyes sharp as knives. Daniel entered, feeling the weight of their gaze. The strategist, a thin man named Varen, rose and spoke first. "You claim to be worthy of the Empire," Varen said. "But what can a human bring to our world that we do not already have?" Daniel took a breath. "I bring experience from the stars beyond your borders. I bring determination and a willingness to learn. I bring loyalty to those who earn it and a refusal to back down from a fight." The council challenged him with questions about trade disputes, about war and peace, about the value of alliances. Daniel answered carefully, drawing on his years of navigating complex human politics and his growing understanding of Virelan culture. The turning point, after hours of debate, Varen smiled, a small, respectful smile. "You surprise me, human," he said. "Your words carry weight. Perhaps the Empire needs more than tradition. Perhaps it needs courage and new ideas." The council nodded in agreement. The Queen's eyes shone with approval. Daniel bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The final challenge looms. As the sun dipped low, Daniel knew one trial remained, a test of courage unlike any he had faced before. Princess Arya approached him quietly. "The last challenge will be dangerous," she warned. "It is the trial of the Sky Beast." Daniel met her gaze without fear. "I will face it." She smiled faintly. "And I will be with you, every step." The palace was no longer just a place of power and politics. It was the ground where two worlds collided and where a human's heart would be tested against the might of an ancient empire. Daniel took a deep breath, ready for whatever came next. The dawn air was thick with tension as Daniel Cross stood at the edge of the palace spires. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the sharp silver towers of the Virelan Empire's heart. Below, the city hummed with life. Markets opening, ships docking, nobles preparing for the day. But Daniel's world was smaller now, focused on the narrow ledge he stood upon and the challenge that waited. The trial of the Sky Beast was the final test, a challenge meant to push him to the edge of courage and survival. The Sky Beast awakens, eh? Low growl echoed from the darkness beneath the ledge. Daniel's heart quickened as he peered down into the swirling mist far below. The Sky Beast was a creature of legend, a massive winged predator with scales like black glass and eyes that burned like stars. It was said to patrol the palace skies, attacking those who threatened the Empire. From the edge of the spire, Daniel could see the beast's great wings slicing through the clouds, its shadow flickering like a storm on the walls. He had no weapon, heavier than his blaster, no armor beyond his uniform, and no allies except the determination in his chest. The descent. The trial required Daniel to climb down the spire's sheer walls, navigate the misty heights, and confront the beast before it could attack the palace below. Step by step, he lowered himself, fingers gripping cold stone. The wind howled, threatening to rip him away. Below, the mist shifted, and the beast's glowing eyes appeared, watching. Daniel's breath came fast, but he forced himself to stay calm. He remembered the frozen moon, the mercenaries, the binding oath that had brought him here. He pressed on. The encounter as he reached a narrow ledge. The beast swooped down with a deafening roar. Daniel fired his blaster, the energy bolts flashing in the mist. The creature dodged with terrifying speed, claws scraping the stone where he had just been. The battle was a test of skill and will. Daniel dodged, climbed, and fired, always keeping his focus. The beast was powerful, but Daniel was relentless. After a tense struggle, he managed to corner the creature against a wall. Instead of killing it, Daniel lowered his weapon and spoke softly. "I don't want to fight you." The beast paused, its fierce eyes studying him. Slowly, it lowered its head, a low rumble of acceptance. The return, with the sky beast's reluctant respect, Daniel climbed back up to the palace spires. News of his success spread quickly through the court. Queen Melora awaited him at the throne room, her expression unreadable but her eyes shining. "You have faced the trials and proven yourself," she said. Daniel bowed. "I only did what was necessary." The queen gestured toward the hall. "You are no longer just a guest. You are a member of the Virilan family. Your bond with Princess Arya is honored." The celebration. The court erupted in applause, nobles standing in respect. Even those who had doubted him nodded in acknowledgement. Arya stepped forward, her hand finding Daniel's. "You have shown what it means to be worthy," she said. Daniel smiled. "It was not just me. You were with me every step." Together, they faced the future. A future where a human and a Virelan princess stood side by side, ready to shape the empire together.